Welcome to Related Services. Therapy belongs in the classroom, not in the broom closet. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss what's the real purpose of related services in the schools. We'll also look at the definition of integrated therapy, and then I'll try to map out where you even begin if you're going to start going into the classroom to deliver services. We're also going to discuss the secrets of collaboration because that's what will make this work. And then we're going to look at a place to start. If you even dare to go into the classroom, how can you start? Just a little bit about my background, and I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Becky Handler, and I work for StarNet Region 6. I just wanted to give my background so you know why I even felt the need to develop this workshop. I'm a speech-language pathologist. I got my undergraduate degree at Syracuse University, and then I went to Emerson College, which very interestingly, they really talked about getting into the classroom. Most of the time, my professors were talking about therapy being delivered in the classroom and not in an individual speech room. So I was very used to this, and this is how I thought speech therapy was supposed to be delivered. I then moved to Chicago and I worked for a special ed co-op called SMA, and my first job was 2 speech pathologists in the classroom, team teaching kindergarten age children with severe speech and language disorders. So again, very natural. There I was, a speech pathologist in a classroom, not in an individual therapy room. After SMA dissolved, I was an inclusion facilitator for a few years, and now I've been with StarNet for 25 years. So just think about, where do you provide your therapy? Do you provide most of it in your therapy room? Do you go into the classroom? Or are you trying to be a little bit more integrated and provide some in the classroom and some in your therapy room? Just think about it. If you work in a preschool for all classroom, the compliance checklist says they would like to see the majority of services pushed in. Best practice would be minimally 50% of the time. I did read an article in the ASHA Journal, which is the Speech and Language Journal, several years ago, and it talked about maybe saying push in therapy isn't the greatest word, because if I'm pushing in, that means I'm pushing into the teacher's classroom. Am I being too pushy? Some people call it integrated therapy, but another way in this article they said is maybe we should just call it in-classroom services. The teachers might be a little bit more favorable to this. Maybe it's not as intimidating to have someone push into my classroom. So that's just a little thought. If you aren't in the classroom yet, maybe how you even want to describe what your services will be. So if you decided to listen to this webinar, you must be questioning what really is wrong with doing my pull-out therapy. Why can't I do it? So I'd like to start this webinar by looking at some of the research and some of the school law that tells us really where we should be doing our therapy. If we think about this for a moment, really the purpose of school-based therapy is to optimize a student's abilities to perform in school and in their classroom. This really can't be accomplished in a therapy room that's down the hall. You don't know all the child is going through while they're in the classroom. For example, how do you work on social communication skills when you aren't in the classroom? You don't know where the child might be having social problems. How do you learn how to join a group if it's just me and maybe 2 other kids in the social work room? What's really important in an early childhood classroom? What skills do I need in that early childhood classroom to be successful, to learn, and to be a part of my classroom? Those are the skills that need to be worked on. We need to remember in schools, we are not running a clinic. Whether you're integrating your therapy or you're still using a pull-out method, We need to remember the real goal of related services in school, and that goal is to help the child access the curriculum. We have curriculums in early childhood, and if a child can't play in centers, we need to ask why and what can we do to help that child be successful. Is it a communication issue? Is it a sensory issue? Is it a motor issue? Is there something physical? We need to look at the adaptations and accommodations that we can suggest and provide to help that child be successful. The focus of our therapy has to be how can that child best perform in their classroom. In early childhood, that performance mostly happens during our hour center time, but of course, we can use the whole day to help a child be successful. Therapy can be provided at any point during the day, and I'll get into that. The other thing we must think about is our school code, and I just want to read this. Our school code states that it requires the IEP to include a statement of the special education and related services the child will receive, as well as the program modifications or support for the school personnel that will be provided. And all of that has to be stated in order to enable the child to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum. So our own school code is telling us that we have to do our best to help that child make progress in the general education curriculum. So if we really read it, it's telling us that we've got to know what that curriculum is and we have to be involved in it. So we should be in the classroom. We need to figure out the program modifications and supports the child needs in order to make progress. And if you're not in the classroom, it's a little hard to figure that out. Just want to share this infographic from ECLRE that shows really what makes inclusion work in early childhood. And in order for it to work, you need all of these pieces, right? Many times schools jump into inclusion, but we haven't really discussed what the vision or the attitude is, or there hasn't been enough professional learning for staff. I talked about, we're going to discuss teaming. We're also going to talk about those adaptations, and the families need to know what's going on. So again, you're not just the related service person deciding you're going to go into the classroom. You're doing this because we want children included and we want them in the classroom as much as possible, once again, to access that curriculum. So just a definition of what is integrated therapy, whatever you want to call it, integrated therapy, in-service therapy. This is when the occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech pathologists, social workers come into the classroom to help the teaching staff, i.e. the teachers and the assistants, meet children's individual needs during all hours the therapists are not in the classroom. So we know you can't be in that classroom the full 2.5 hours. When you're not there, have you provided the supports so the teachers can give the child the support they need and that child can be successful? The other part of the definition is the teaching staff attend to what the therapists are doing and vice versa. Teaching staff and therapists communicate with one another. Now, in order for this to work, yes, there has to be some role release. I have to be okay as the physical therapist saying, I've now guided the teacher, I've now guided the teaching assistant, I've showed them the strategies, I've showed them the proper placement. Now they can implement those strategies when I'm not there. 30 minutes of pull-out is not enough. But if you're in the classroom and demonstrating all of these strategies, the child's going to get more than the 30 minutes of therapy that you were giving them down the hall. Integrated therapy also means that those services take place in a child's natural setting. So we know in early intervention, a child's natural setting was in their home, right? That was the most natural place to provide services to the child and the parents. Well, the same goes for school. A classroom is much more natural than the hallway or the separate room down the hall or even a clinic. The other thing that integrated therapy means is that services are coordinated with everyday routines and they're implemented by the everyday caretaker. So you, as the related services, it's pretty impossible. There's only a few schools that you can be in one classroom the whole day. So when you can't be there, the teacher, the teaching assistant need to know those strategies so the child can continue to be successful and make some generalization and improve while you're not there. So Robin McWilliams wrote a wonderful article that I reference in the end, and this article is called Integrating Therapy into the Classroom. And he looks at the difference between integrated and segregated. And I think it's important to look at this. I'm not going to read the slide. You can read it. I'm not saying what you're doing is bad if you're doing your therapy in your therapy room. I'm just saying, look at this. We really need to look at more than the classroom versus the therapy room. We need to look at the difference. How is our therapy integrated? How are we part of that classroom? How are we teaching functional skills that the child really knows so they can be a part of that classroom? How are we communicating to the teacher what they should do when we're not there? What will be best for the child? The presence of peers in the classroom is so much more of a natural thing, right? In order to be successful, I have to learn how to be able to get along with my peers, how to communicate with my peers, how to solve problems with my peers. It's hard to do that when my peers aren't around. Also, we want the child to initiate the activity. If they initiate the activity, they have some preference in it. It means they're interested in it, as opposed to us picking the activity for them. Again, when I'm part of that classroom, I can teach something that is functional. I'm going to help the child right away, not to practice that skill when I'm not there anymore. So really, we want to start thinking about how we can integrate the skills the child needs into the classroom. So if for the past 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, you've had a child in early childhood and you've taken that child out of the classroom and you've let the teacher know what you've done in there and you've let the families know what you're doing, it's going to be a little maybe unsettling for parents if you are changing the way you're delivering their services. So how can you communicate with parents? If you're changing, you really have to talk to them. So if the parent asks where are services going to be taking place now, a really good way to present it to parents is the services are now going to be brought to your child right in the classroom instead of taking your child out of the classroom. If they ask, won't my child be embarrassed if you're working with them, you can let them explain how therapy works, that your child isn't going to be singled out, that you're going to integrate right in with whatever activity the child is doing, and it'll be done in a much more natural way as opposed to calling your child's name and having your child walk out of the classroom individually to meet me in my therapy room. Some parents are concerned that their child won't get the attention if you're in the classroom, but we can let them know that really children perform better when they're not interrupted, right? So often we go into the classroom and it maybe could be 10 minutes of coaxing that child to stop the activity. We have to walk down the hall. Now the services are being delivered in a more inclusive manner. We also really have to explain to the child, to the parents, that the child isn't receiving less services. If anything, they're going to be receiving more services because now any other adults in the classroom see exactly what type of support your child needs, and I'll be able to demonstrate to them, and they can now provide those supports when I'm not there. We haven't talked about in the past, we might walk back into the classroom and we could say, Becky did a great job today doing da-da-da, and we're quickly going to tell the teacher, but the teacher is already involved teaching the 19 other kids, so the teacher can only half listen. Or I might write a post-it note to the teacher, or I might send an email. But that's a whole lot different than watching me and demonstrating how I support the child when I'm right in the classroom. It's much more effective than just a quick summary or a quick note to the teacher. So hopefully, posing it that way will make parents comfortable with the change and to see that it's really best for their child. So Robin Williams talks about 10 good reasons really why our therapy should be integrated. And he talks about the children are going to be learning skills where they will be used. We all know I was a speech pathologist and I did do some in my own little therapy room. And we know that we say, Becky did great today. Becky was able to do this. And then we bring the child back to the classroom. And so often that generalization didn't happen, or that generalization took a long time. But now I'm going to be using a skill that I have learned right in my classroom. The other thing is now I have an increased opportunity to practice that skill. Someone's there to help me practice it. Other adults see how I practice it, and now they're going to give me those opportunities. If I'm not pulled from the classroom and I'm right in the classroom, I can continue to foster those social relationships. I can continue to play with the children that I like to play with. And maybe when I'm by children that I like to play with, my social skills are better, my speech is better, or I'm more apt to participate in a communication. If I'm in the classroom and my therapy is integrated, I'm not missing out on any class activities. They're not just activities, they're learning opportunities. So when I am not in the classroom, I was missing out on learning opportunities. But if I'm integrated in doing my therapy, I'm not missing those class activities. And then finally, as I keep saying, the teacher sees what the therapists are doing, so my skills can continue to be expanded even when I'm not getting my 30 minutes of direct therapy. Number 6 reason that Robin McWilliams talks about is that they say the therapists can see their strategies working in the classroom. So now I come back the next week or the second day that week, and I see, because the child has had 3 people demonstrate my strategy, I see the child now maybe implementing that strategy and trying to figure something out. Teachers and therapists can focus on skills that are useful. Again, go back to the beginning of this presentation. What were the skills? What are the skills that I need to be successful in my classroom, in my early childhood classroom? The other thing is therapists can work with the teacher to address problems. So if I'm the classroom teacher, I don't have to wait a whole week to say, you know, John, he really is having problems in the block area. Every time he goes to the block area, all he does is knock down his friend's towers. Well, maybe he's knocking down his friend's towers because he doesn't have the language skills to say, can I join in? Or maybe he doesn't have the social skills to even know how to join in. But if I'm the therapist and I'm in the classroom, I'm seeing that and I can address that problem right away. And then finally, the assessment can be done across several routines. So again, I'm not pulling. I can see, okay, can they do it in this situation? Can they do it in this situation? Wow, they've really met that objective. And then finally, Robin McWilliams likes to say, why do we do integrated therapy? We do it because it's the right thing to do. And really, I can't enforce that idea of generalization. That's always been a struggle. And if you're in that classroom and providing everything in the classroom, that generalization is going to occur. So here's some pictures of some typical things that might happen in an early childhood classroom. And depending what your discipline is, look at these pictures and think to yourself, what objectives that I work on with kids, or what goals that I work on with kids, could be addressed in these different situations? So for example, in the top left, it's circle time or story time. If I'm an OT, I could definitely work on a child's trunk support. If I'm a speech pathologist, I could work on articulation and maybe have the child repeat some words that have the sounds that they're working on. If I'm a social worker, I certainly could work on skills like waiting my turn or friendship. Now look at the picture of the boy in the wheelchair. Again, think of your specialty. What skills could you be working on if you came in and you were greeting that boy in the morning? Again, if I'm an OT, I could be working on positioning. Maybe he's gotten off the bus and he's been sitting like that and he needs to be positioned a little bit higher in his wheelchair. If I'm a speech pathologist, I could just be working on social greetings, morning greetings. Now look at the little picture of the girls cutting with the scissors. We would think that's definitely an OT skill. But again, if I'm a speech pathologist, I could be working on following directions. If I'm a social worker, I could be working on handling frustration or identifying social emotional literacy or language. Now look at that last picture of the teacher and the boy talking on the telephone. Again, think of your discipline. What goal could you meet in the classroom to make sure that child is more successful in their class? What could you work on? There's multiple skills, right? And some of these pictures I have you just working alone with the child. The one picture of the story time or circle time is a group. You can work with children even if they're not on your caseload or you're not working with them, quote unquote, but they can be part of your activity that you're doing with the child. So whenever I do this presentation, I used to do it live, I always got the question, but I have to make sure that the children get the minutes. And there's 20 kids and not all those kids are on the caseload. So this is just something to think about. I'm going to read this to you and just think about this. If a child in their IEP is supposed to receive 60 minutes of speech a week, if the speech pathologist comes in twice a week during centers, while the speech pathologist is in the classroom playing with the children on their caseload, she's also talking with the teacher about the different strategies that can be implementing or that she's implementing right then and there. If that teacher is able to implement some of the strategies 10 minutes every hour, the child is actually getting 20 extra minutes of therapy 5 days a week for a total of 160 minutes a week. And again, remember, you have to have some of that role release. You have to say that even though the teacher is not a speech language pathologist with a master's degree in that specification or a social worker, with some modeling and with some demonstration, the teacher can support the child. And again, remember, I'll keep repeating it, the teacher can support that child so they can be successful in the classroom and access the curriculum of the classroom. So let's take a closer look at your goals. Speech and language services, or any of your services, and I'm sorry, I give a lot of speech and language examples because that is my background as I shared with you. We should think of our services as portable, right? I talked about this, that we're bringing them into the classroom. So our direct service is not the only way to help the child, okay? Yes, I can go into the classroom, that in-classroom service we talked about, but you also could run a center. I was in one classroom where on Fridays they had a game center. So maybe you would come in on Friday and you would play a board game with kids and kids could come to that center. You also can recommend ideas. I know you do this already, right? You can modify or adapt materials for the teacher. And again, if you're in the classroom, And if I'm a speech pathologist and a child needs some visuals, I'm going to see where that child really broke down. Maybe they do fine during centers, but maybe it was during circle that the child needs some visuals to know when to come to the circle and where to sit down. If I'm not there, I'm just getting the teacher telling me what's happening. So don't just look at one way to deliver your service. A lot of people start by coming into the classroom and they run their social work group, or they run their speech pathology group, or they run their OT group. But you want to be part of the classroom. So if you're running that center, anybody can come to that center, or you're just going to stay in dramatic play the whole time. Again, there's no written rule how to do this. You have to do it how you feel most comfortable, and how, I really should say, how it supports the kids the best way. Maybe you don't come in during centers, but if the classroom doesn't have centers during a snack during center time, you come in at snack time. Maybe that's when you want to have your direct therapy. We need to keep in mind that there's a continuum of service for all types of related services. And our goal is to provide related services in the least restrictive environment for that child. And the classroom would be the least restrictive environment if I'm in a school setting. But remember that there's a continuum, so it doesn't need to be, it may not be for all kids in all situations. So maybe sometimes some things have to happen out of the classroom, right? Or maybe you could just consult with the teacher, and the teacher would then be able to implement the adaptations or the strategies in the classroom, and the student can remain in the classroom and be quite successful. They might need a little bit more of you coming in, so you're bringing the services there. And then there are occasions where a child still needs to be pulled out of the classroom on occasions. Of course, if there's anything health related, right? We don't want to do that in the classroom. That would single a child out. So again, back to this great article by Robin McWilliams. He looks at the continuum of service delivery. And what I really like about this is don't just think about the place therapy takes place. There's other things to look at also on the continuum. So he looks at a model of that one-on-one pullout, maybe a small group pullout, which I think more people are doing so you can meet everybody on your caseload. Is there a group activity? Is it individualized within a routine? Is it consultation? Now, these are all models with on the continuum, but then we have to look at where is that one-on-one therapy going to take place? Or where is that group therapy, group activity going to take place? What's the therapy focus going to be? Am I going to include peers? What's the context? Who's going to initiate the choice of the activity? So you identify where you might need to start on the continuum, and of course you work to move down to a more integrated approach. So for example, you might do a small group away from the class, and the focus is on functioning of a child with special needs. You might have one peer learning a different context with a specialist as the initiator. Okay, but our ultimate goal, so I am saying that there is a continuum, and I understand there are situations where maybe in the classroom is not the most successful. But going back to that PFA, that we want at least a minimum of 50% of services provided in the classroom. Our goal is that the motto would be individual during a routine. So during whatever that child chose to play during centers, or it could be individual meeting that child at the bus and walking down the hall. Where would be? The location would be in the classroom, or where the child is. It might be that everybody's in the gross motor room. And what's your therapy focus going to be? Directly, but not exclusively, the children on your caseload. I know and I understand if you go into a classroom and you're an adult, you're going to attract other children. So you're not going to tell those children, no, no, you're not on my caseload. I can't work with you. First of all, we know there's a lot of those children that are either waiting to be evaluated, or we see some red flags, some concerns with them, and they're not getting individualized therapy yet. So think about that benefit of you coming into the classroom. We're going to look about peers. Usually we would like peers present because, again, that's their natural environment. They're used to walking into a classroom with 15, 17, 20 children. So if you take those peers away, that's not a natural environment for them in school. And then again, our ultimate goal would be within the context of the classroom. And who do we want to initiate the activity? We want the child. We want to follow the child's lead. And again, by following the child's lead, there's going to be, I don't want to say more buy-in, but the child's interested already in what they're doing. So, like anything, with inclusion, I just spoke about the continuum. So you're probably saying, can I ever pull a child out? There are times, and I gave that example of even with some health concerns, sometimes you do need to do a formal assessment that you maybe need some distraction not there, and you might need to pull the child. Again, we want to pull the child in the most natural environment. I was just in a webinar where a teacher said that she tried to pull the child to the hallway to do some assessment, and she got nothing out of the child. And then she did do it in the classroom, and she couldn't believe what the child could do. Well, that's because sitting in a desk in a hallway for an early childhood teacher, an early childhood student, is probably the most unnatural environment. Okay, so this is not 100%. This is not, you never can pull a child. But again, we want to do as much as we can in the classroom, which would be their natural environment. So I'm about halfway through this presentation, and hopefully I've gotten your mind to start making a shift and maybe thinking about providing more therapy in the classroom. But you're probably saying, where do I even begin? Where do I start with this? And consultation is really the critical piece of integrated therapy, okay? It's best to start small and talk to someone who maybe has the same beliefs as you. So, is there another related service person that you work with? You're the social worker. Does the speech pathologist think that maybe services would be better in the classroom? Is there a classroom teacher that you have a great relationship with and you guys team really well? Is there an administrator that's trying to get this going? So find that person that can be your support. Start small. Then you have to sort of develop a plan. And you have to ask, who will do this with me and what roles will each of us play? Okay, so are all the speech pathologists going to, I worked with one school that they did decide, the speech pathologist went to more than one school, and they decided they were all going to do this. So when they were assigning caseloads in the summer, they were really able to look at classroom schedules and figure out how to make this work so the speech pathologist could get into the classrooms at different times and on different days. That's really planning, right? Then you have to, with the classroom teacher, review the IEP. The classroom teacher needs to know what you are working on. What are the things that that child is working on in their IEP? Yes, the teacher might have been in the meeting, but do they understand what those objectives really mean? Then you need to meet with the team and discuss the best way to share progress. So how is the teacher comfortable with you demonstrating strategies? Everybody's different. The teacher might want to wait until you're done, or the teacher might like you to say, hey, Becky, look at this. Look what I'm doing right now. But you have to ask that teacher. You have to ask that assistant. And then you're going to decide how to communicate, okay? Because yes, you can share some things in the classroom, but I'm a visual learner, right? So if you tell me something, I might forget it. So I might decide with you, you know what, I'm going to leave a notebook on my desk when you're there. Can you do that note that you used to jot down for me? Can you still do that? Because now you've given me a visual way to remember it, but I'll see the steps in the notebook. So again, this might look different with each teacher, but you need to make these decisions together. So teamwork, this is a little bit hard to read, this picture, but it just shows the anatomy of effective team member, right? It's everything. I like this because it says feet firmly on the ground, legs to go the distance. You're flexible. You got a big heart, a strong stomach. You have great ideas, willing to learn, willing to be a good listener, strong-willed, optimistic, right? These are all the things you need to be a good team member. And I'm going on both sides, right? Because this is a change for the teacher and this is a change for you. It might be change for the administration also. Seems very, very basic, but in order for teamwork to work, just think about it. Teamwork is just cooperation. We've all talked about cooperation forever, right? We all have to get along, and that getting along and working together is going to look different in different classrooms. And then the big thing is all team members must feel that they're doing their part. So that very first year of my teaching, when I worked in the kindergarten classroom, I had a social worker that went from to 3 schools, and she definitely did not feel like part of the team. At the end of the year, when we didn't have such a great relationship, it came out that she did feel like she just sort of came into the classroom with her activity she was going to do. We sort of sat back and didn't really communicate much with her. So that's not effective teaming, right? We should have known ahead of time what she was doing. We should have known, how can we help? What role would you like us to play? But again, we kind of just jumped into it without the discussion. So think about how you can cooperate to make your team the most successful it can. Why? For the benefit of the children, right? And again, teamwork is simply collaboration. The magic isn't what happens down the hall in our little room. Rather, what can really make a difference is when strategies are shared and can be implemented in the classroom during everyday routines. Partnership means a willingness to work together. Roles means everyone who works with that child needs to know the strategies that work for that child. It's just as important for the para to be able to implement the strategy as it is for the teacher to implement the strategy. When we define roles, no one feels that they're crossing boundaries. Everybody knows their roles, everybody knows their responsibilities. So in order for collaboration to work, there really are some key factors that have to be in place. One of the most important is there has to be adequate time to meet. And sometimes you have to get creative, and we're going to talk about this in a few more slides. But there has to be time where everybody on the team can get together and discuss what needs to be done. The other really important piece is everybody has to feel respected. So I have to feel that I'm just as respected as the related service, as the teacher, as the paraprofessional. The other piece is trust. So does the teacher trust that the therapist is going to come into her classroom and be a part of the classroom and not change the flow of the classroom? Does the related service person feel welcomed into the classroom? There has to be effective communication, and I touched on this. Everybody likes to communicate in different ways. So as a related service, that might be a little difficult for you because you might communicate differently with different teachers. But there has to be open communication. There also has to be full participation. Full participation with everybody that is involved with that child, okay? So everybody needs to be working for the success of that child. And then finally, everybody has to understand what goals are being worked on and what strategies need to be developed and how they're going to be integrated into the classroom. So, as I said, time is really, really critical in order to make this collaboration work. And I've talked with many teams that have gotten very creative. So, do you decide as a team that we're all good, we're all going to come to school 10 minutes early and we're going to discuss and make sure we're knowing what we're going to do when I come into your classroom that day? Or are you a group of people that don't like to get to school early and you'd rather stay 10 minutes after school? Do you agree to talk during your lunch? I've worked with several schools now that hire a floating sub, and that sub goes into the classrooms for a half hour, and that allows the teams to meet. And then when the classroom teacher goes back, the sub goes to the next classroom. Not as easy now, but parent volunteer. Could a parent come in and help while you're having a meeting? Could you meet on an early release day? Is it just best if you do email? Could you have that communication notebook? Could you meet via Teams? Could you meet via Zoom, since the related service people might not be in the same building? Again, you've got to get creative, and this really needs to be planned before the implementation starts. Because again, if we don't have time to talk as a team and to know what everybody's roles are, it's not going to work, and it's hard to go backwards. So making the time in the beginning, before this all begins, is really important. And again, how do you meet as a team? So most schools, I think, have found this, okay? But is this working? Is it working if you're able to meet daily, weekly, monthly? If it's not working, before you jump into this, you might need to tweak things, okay? So maybe I do that 10-minute daily meet, but maybe I do need some monthly time where we can have a good 30, 40 minutes to discuss things. The answer can't be F, okay? The answer can't be never. You have to meet somehow as a team in order to make this collaboration work. So you've been listening to me talk for quite a while now, and you're thinking, how can I really do this? I have this big classroom. So again, in the Robin McWilliams article, and it's really the best article out there, so that's why I'm talking about it a lot, he says you really need to re-examine your techniques you use in your room with the techniques that work in the classroom. You need to find out what the child needs to learn to be successful. Again, I keep saying, go back to those original slides in this presentation. What does that child have to do every day in that classroom? That's what your goals need to be. You need to really think about those functional skills. You need to incorporate consultation into your therapy time, right? Because you want to leave the classroom with the teacher feeling comfortable to implement when you're gone and to provide you feedback when you come back into the classroom. You also need to think about some consultation time, right? And we talked about the different ways to do that. You want it to be meaningful when you're not there, okay? So again, how are you going to communicate? Are you fine with me throwing, if I send you an email, but you're a person that doesn't check your email every day or every few days, then that's not an effective way to do some consultation when I'm not there. And then we want to integrate planned activities. This embedded learning is really important because you do have objectives on your IEP. They should be functional for the child to be successful in the classroom, but you have to be intentional. And now I'm going to move into what this embedded learning opportunities are, because this is how you can make sure that the objectives that you need to address are really being met in the classroom. So embedded learning opportunities are giving the child increased learning opportunities to demonstrate a skill. They're planned and they focus on an identified objective. And the way that you do this is you embed short, little systematic instructional interactions into the classroom activity. It's just natural, but it's planned. An individual objective may be different or more specific than the general goal of the activity. So maybe one child will work on sorting by size in the house center with different size plates, for example, but John will work on following directions in the game centers, and Nancy's asking questions during the snack center. But I've planned this up. I've planned this out, and I know how Nancy is going to have opportunities to ask questions during a snack while she's eating snack. I've made sure it's set up to give her those opportunities. That's an embedded learning opportunity. So if you're interested in that, this book, Building Blocks, has a whole chapter on embedded opportunities. But the whole book is broken down on what are all different modifications, or I really think they're more adaptations, we can offer to a child to make that child successful. So there are environmental changes that we could make. So maybe I have a child that's in a wheelchair and I'm going to make sure that there's plenty of space to get in and out of centers. There may be material. Maybe I can leave special material with the teacher so the child can be as successful in an activity. I could simplify an activity. I could demonstrate to the teacher that if the child only does part of this, maybe we can get them to sit for the activity. And these are things that teachers should be doing even whether or not the related service person is coming into the classroom. But again, it just makes it more specific and everybody knows what they're doing, and we have specific strategies that we're implementing to make the children more successful. Does that child need some kind of special equipment? So go back to that picture of the teacher working with the child while they're cutting. Does that child need special scissors? And maybe then they would be more successful. Is there some adult support I can give or demonstrate? Is there peer support? Is there a friend that would be willing to help this child? And then invisible support is arranging naturally occurring events. So for example, if I'm shy, maybe you could get me to sit next to a talkative child. If I have low muscle tone and you're doing a cooking activity, maybe you have several kids stir, or maybe you let me stir after several kids have stirred the batter, because now it's easier for me to stir as things have been mixed in. So again, these are adaptations, modifications to share with the teacher, or for the teacher to share with you. This is what we're doing in the classroom to make the child be more successful. If you're coming into the classroom, you really want to make sure the objectives that you have on your IEP are being addressed, because you still need documentation. So I'm a big supporter of using an activity matrix. So I'm going to take a few objectives from the child's IEP. I'm going to look at the classroom schedule and I'm going to say, what would be the best place to collect documentation or to give the child an opportunity to demonstrate knowledge of this objective? I'm going to share this with the teacher. So it either can be just a check mark that these are the best places to give the child opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge, or it can be used to collect documentation. I've talked a lot about that during centers, but we know that not all the specialists can come into the classroom during centers. That'd be too many teachers in the classroom. So I want us to think about meeting goals during everyday routines. From the minute those kids walk off the bus or are dropped off by the parents to the minute that that bus leaves or their parents pick them up. So again, looking at these pictures, think of your specialty. If you said to the teacher, you know what, I'm going to meet the kids at the bus today, or I'm going to meet so-and-so at the bus today, what objective could you work on while meeting the child at the bus and walking them down to the classroom and helping them with the morning routine? Any specialist should be able to address an objective doing that. What objective could I work on while playing with the kids at the sand table? Are there special toys or materials I could add to give the children more opportunities to demonstrate knowledge of something that I'm getting them to work on? What objective could I meet if I read the story to the class? Could the teacher help me with documentation while I read the book? Or is there a book that I could suggest that the teacher read that would help me meet some of my objectives? What small group activity could I intentionally plan so I could work with multiple kids and address several objectives at the same time? Again, all of this takes planning and communication so you know what the teacher is planning to do for that day that you're coming into the classroom, or for that hour that you're coming into the classroom. So just some general ideas. Now I'm going to look at each of the related services that might come into an early childhood classroom. If I'm a speech pathologist, again, I've sort of addressed this, but I could follow the child's interest during play and address my goals doing whatever the child chooses to do during centers. I could share interactions with the teacher so the child can continue to practice these skills. I could work with materials already in the classroom. Instead of bringing in my bag of tricks or my bags of materials, I can get familiar with the materials in the classroom and I can be intentional with those materials. Now I'm in the classroom and I have opportunities to hear what's working. What is the child generalizing? What skills are they generalizing? Or, once again, what issues are they having? Do I need to write some scripts so the child knows how to play appropriate in a center and they can practice these scripts? Are there certain books that I could suggest to add to the classroom library so a child could practice with some targeted speech sounds? Can I coach some peers about how to interact with the child when they can't understand their peer? So these are some things that you could focus on while you're in the classroom. I really want to look at the speaking, listening, and thinking. Okay, and I need to focus on sensory motor, language, social and emotional growth to make that child successful. So again, if I'm an occupational therapist, this is really, really important because now you have multiple opportunities in the classroom to demonstrate techniques and purposeful activities and strategies that will help the child with their motor difficulties. You also can take some time to adapt the learning environment and the materials that are in the classroom so the child can be more successful when you're not there. You can look at routines the child has to do in the classroom and see how could you set up those routines, or how could those routines be adapted a bit so the child can do them more independently. You also could demonstrate to the teacher the importance of motor breaks and where they could occur naturally during the school day. And again, something like a motor break is wonderful for all children in early childhood. They all could use some breaks. And then again, you could use some peer support. Use those very motivational, those students, I call them the mother hens in the classroom, to help your student maybe while you're not there. There's always a little child that wants to push the wheelchair, right? But if we take that time to teach the child how to do it, what happens when they come to a bump? What happens if they go too fast? go back to that model of Robin McWilliams, right? Peer support is a wonderful thing. So if I'm the physical therapist, I could review the classroom schedule and I could really find that optimal time for me to provide treatment, right? Again, maybe it's gross motor time. Maybe it's when that child chooses to do an art activity. I want to model those activities. And then a big piece is really making sure, and I hope that most early childhood classrooms already are like this, but what adaptations need to be made so that child can be as successful with what other physical maybe limitations that they have. Again, it might be that, circle time and working on some kind of balance there, or even during gross motor time or going outside. If I'm a social worker, and I think social workers are doing more and more in the classroom with kids, right? But we have to plan and implement individual interventions within the classroom. So all of our children in early childhood could use social emotional support. We know that that's the basis to their learning. But there are those specific kids that really need extra support. And if I'm in the classroom, I can really demonstrate to the teacher how to implement those individual interventions. I also can help the teacher develop problem-solving strategies for the kids, right? It's not enough just to have a cozy corner. I have to teach children what to do while they're there. So if I'm the social worker, maybe I teach that during group time, or when a child is having a breakdown, I go to the cozy corner with the child and I demonstrate what to do. I can lead some small group intervention because, yes, I might have some kids on my caseload, but once again, in early childhood, most of those kids need some social emotional intervention. Teaching self-regulation techniques is a huge part, all right? And it's really important in early childhood. And then again, if there's some specific interventions, the teacher really gets to see you modeling them firsthand to help that child be successful. So as I come to the end of this webinar, I'm hoping I've convinced you, okay? I hope you're saying, I believe this can work where you work. Or maybe you're at the point where you're saying, I'm starting to believe this could work, so maybe I've started to get some wheels spinning in your mind. And if you're not sure that this can work where you currently are employed, start to think about how you could begin to make those big shifts and go back to that infographic about what makes inclusion work, right? If you don't think this could work, it must be that you feel that you're doing this alone. Who else can you get on board? What pieces are missing? So it's really time to move on. If you've listened to this, I feel like you have some motivation to make the change, to get out of your broom closet and into the classroom. So just to end this webinar, think about, after listening to this webinar, what is one change in therapy that you could do this month? So starting small, as I said. What's that one teacher that maybe you think would let you into your classroom? What's that one kid that you really think would be so much more successful if you were providing strategies in the classroom? And then think about what's one way you can be a better collaborator, right? I talked about how people like to communicate differently, how people like to meet at different times. Is there someone that you're not including in the loop of your conversation? And then what's one change you'll begin to implement the rest of the year and continue for the next year? What's a change in your service delivery model that you're really going to commit to change? Take the time after this webinar to think about these 3 things. Thank you for joining me. I hope I've made a difference. I hope I've got you thinking. Here's the references that I used, that Building Block books, the Robin McWilliams article. And thank you for joining me. Have a nice day.